Thank you for all being here. Welcome. I was told what we wanted to talk about today a little bit was how cooperatives create a different kind of economic culture and actually create economic sustainability within communities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Common Ground, and I'm going to talk a lot about the cooperative movement as a whole, of which Common Ground is just a piece, and what we do is just a piece of a much larger web of what cooperatives can do, and are doing throughout our country and throughout the world. With that, what is a cooperative? A lot of people ask that question, and actually there's a lot of misunderstanding about what a cooperative is, or different feelings on what it is, and people will sometimes use the word in ways that each other don't even agree with. But first off, a cooperative is not a nonprofit or a charity, and it is not a corporation. What is it? If it's not a nonprofit, and it's not a charity, and it's not a corporation, where does it fall? What exactly is it? Cooperatives are a business structure, and in the dictionary, a cooperative is a farm, business, or other organization that is owned and run jointly by its members who share the profits and benefits. So, not a nonprofit in that we run a business and it generates its own income. But it is also not a corporation in that everyone who participates in the cooperative equally as owners, equally profits and benefits from it. No one is allowed to profit individually off a cooperative. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Another way to look at it, another way to phrase it that I have heard is it's a for community profit business. Cooperatives do generate profit if they function as traditional businesses. If they do not generate a profit, like any other business that does not generate a profit, they do not stay open. One of the misunderstandings about the word profit is what it actually means. When a business generates a profit, that's meant what it costs to run the business versus what money comes in. Is there any leftover? And that leftover then pays for if a cooler breaks down. We have to replace a cooler. That actually profit is considered before the cost of replacing the cooler. If you have any debt that needs to be paid down from an expansion or from something, or for the business, that is paid out of the profit. So we have to generate some profit to generate a nest egg to pay any debts and to replace equipment. And we do generate a profit. We have a healthy business. But the profit needs to be for community. And what I mean by that, just in the legal sense, let's just start there, is that there are two things we can do with the profit as a cooperative. It is a legal statute that you actually incorporate under in your state. The state of Illinois' cooperative statute is actually really poor and archaic. We're working on that right now. But the two things we can do with it is we can reinvest it. We may reinvest it in the existing business to materially improve the business for the owners. So we can take the profit and reinvest it in the existing business to improve it for the owners, or we can pay it as patronage dividends out to the owners. So in Common Ground, we have over 5,000 owners, and in our case, we're a consumer cooperative. I'm going to talk about types of cooperatives in a minute, but a consumer cooperative means anyone who walks in the door and economically participates. That is a fancy term for shops with us. If they shop with us, they have the right to purchase a share of the cooperative and to be a full owner as much as any other owner who owns Common Ground. So we have over 5,000. If we were to have a profit and we did not just reinvest it for the well-being of the organization, then it's paid out equally to all the owners as patronage dividends. Now, to give an example, if we had $250,000 of profit in a year, which has never happened, by the way, as of yet, but let's say we did to make my life easy, because we're going with 5,000 owners, we're actually up to about 5,300, then each would get a check for $50 a year. So the reason I'm pointing this out is nobody is going to profit fiscally to the level, no individual owner, that is going to benefit them to put profit first. And so yes, if there's a profit, people might get a check in the mail, and it might be nice to get a $50 check in January at the end of the fiscal year and feel that your co-op made some money and you get to take a little check home, but that's not going to motivate you. Your business that you own, the community owns, these 5,000 people own, they're not interested in generating a profit beyond to keep the organization healthy because they're not going to individually see the gains. We take that factor out. When you have 5,000 fellow owners, you are not going to make a big fiscal gain off profit, so that's not what you want out of your business. You want it to make enough profit just to be healthy. So then what becomes the drive of a cooperative is other benefits and profits to the community. What do we as a group want to accomplish for our community? What do we want the business to be an engine or a vehicle for accomplishing or changing in our community becomes the drive of all 5,000 people, close that, all 5,000 people who are involved. Nate's just gonna keep doing that. So we start to talk about, why do we exist? We don't exist for a profit. We all get together and talk about what are the other goals and gains for everyone involved that we can share, that we want to operate this business to accomplish. So do we generate a profit? Yes, to stay healthy. Does the profit ever have the opportunity to drive the organization? No, because no one's going to profit enough for it to matter. So even that little demon that lives inside of all of us that sometimes thinks that it would be nice to make a little more money can't rule in this situation, because there's no way for you to make money off of being an owner of Common Ground. Very, very little. So backing up a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about cooperative history. Now, cooperation is not new. People have cooperated since the beginning of time. I'm not talking about cooperation in that more general sense, but actually as a legal structure, as a legal business structure outside of nonprofits and corporations. The idea of cooperatives as a business structure started in the late 1800s in England, in Rochdale, England. And it started because of the Industrial Revolution. What had happened is there was a company town. We've experienced this in later years in the US, where a company created a town in the middle of nowhere where they could get some cheap land. They trucked a bunch of people in who had pretty much no way to get out, and had them working endless days at the factory, and then built the only store where they could get their groceries. You had to buy your housing from the company, you bought your food from the company, and you didn't have any way. People had, I forget what it was, but it was 5-10 mile walk in any direction to even get near another town that was about the same size. So you were trapped to the company. What started happening is the company said, well, if we start increasing the food prices to be basically their entire paycheck, they can't stop us. So they started doing that. So first the workers said all that, they said housing and food, there was no money left. They kept increasing food prices. Then they thought, we can make even more money if we start cutting the food with additives. And so they actually started cutting flour with things like talc. And people were actually getting ill. So the people of Rochdale got together and said, we're going to form our own grocery store. And they came up with this idea of the cooperative. And it cost an entire week's wages to become an owner, which was extremely hard for people to come up with. Remember, the company is taking all your money for housing and food. But they made it entire week's wages to rent a little storefront property they were able to rent. They had no electricity. They took a wheelbarrow and walked to the next major city once a week and loaded it up with flour, sugar, and candles. Came back and opened their store in the dark at 7 p.m. after everyone was done with work. And it grew like wildfire, because it empowered people to be in control of their own future. It took the power away from the company that had run their lives and made sure that there was no future outside of the company for them. That was the beginning of cooperation in the Western world, and as a business structure was the Rochdale Pioneers. When they started, decided to set down cooperative values. What would it mean to be a cooperative that they would agree upon? They were actually forward thinking enough that they believed that this was actually a model. Now remember, these are pretty much uneducated factory workers and trapped in a small town who work constantly, who had the forethought to say, we want this to spread. We want workers to be empowered. And we want to make sure we set down boundaries or values that we all agree upon to make sure that this continues to benefit people, not companies. And so they set what was very close to these 7 cooperative values. They've been edited just a little bit in the last 160 years. But these are the 7 values that every cooperative agrees to run their business by. Now, there's no one holding us accountable to that other than our owners. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But generally, most cooperative businesses follow this. Voluntary and open membership. Once it's decided what the membership base will be, we'll talk about types of co-op. Ours is a consumer co-op again. So anyone who consumes the product we're offering has the right to be an owner. We can't You can't bar anyone as long as they participate fiscally in the co-op. But if it's a worker co-op, it's a different matter, or a producer co-op, we'll talk about that. But within the group that you've defined as your owner base, you cannot bar anyone, and you also can't force them. It has to be voluntary to participate. Democratic member control, they have to be able to elect their own, run for their board of directors, elect their board of directors, and have control over the bylaws of the organization. Member economic participation, everyone must participate economically in keeping the business running, or they can't be an owner even if they bought a share. They have to actually be participating in the business to stay an active voter in the business. Autonomy and independence, basically we can't be a subsidiary of another corporation or company. Education, training, and information, that we take seriously passing on more education and knowledge about the cooperative model and helping it spread, that is part of our responsibility by existing, which is part of why I'm here today. Cooperation among cooperatives, this is one of my very favorite. This means that cooperatives, we will help and take care of one another. And I could spend a lot of time giving examples, but if you've ever worked in corporate retail, which I have, I've worked in retail pretty much my entire adult life. If you were having a problem, your business was losing a ton of money in their deli department, and you're just bleeding money and you don't know what the problem is, you've tried these things, try calling the corporation one town over and saying, hey, we're having this problem, how did you solve that? Do you have any ideas? And they'd be like, you're the competition, and hang up the phone. Amongst cooperatives, we enthusiastically share knowledge. Everybody wants everyone else to get better. So we are constantly in contact with cooperatives in Austin, Texas, in Vermont, even just now got into contact with a cooperative in England, where we're actually just sharing knowledge, plugging each other into programs, ideas, ways that we run our business, ways we help make the democracy more active, and sharing those. So every idea that comes through a cooperative is hopefully going out to every other cooperative as much as possible, and we're growing together and benefiting each other. And then the seventh is concern for community. Which means that we reinvest in our communities and that we exist to better our communities, not damage them. Which doesn't sound like a revolutionary idea, but clearly is in our current business culture. So every cooperative for itself defines its ends. You might call this goals, vision. In a cooperative, we usually call them ends, and the idea is that our cooperative will no longer have any work to do. That will be the ultimate end of our work. If we reach this, if this has been accomplished. Now, occasionally you might reach the end of one, although they're supposed to be defined so visionarily that there's always something to strive for, and then you can build another one. I've never seen a co-op close because they met their ends. But this is common grounds, just to give you some ideas of how broad and visionary these goals are. Our goals are that the co-op will serve as the center of a vibrant and inclusive community. Clearly, as much work as we've done on that, we have a ton more work to do on that, and I don't ever see that being complete work. The cooperative movement is strengthened by our existence. The co-op serves as an educational resource on food issues. And our local food movement is equitable, robust, and environmentally sound. Any one of those ends could keep us busy for the rest of many lifetimes. But these are the reasons we operate our business. So we have this engine, the business, to accomplish this. Every cooperative defines this for themselves. Why do we exist? This is done with owner input. Our board of directors did a visioning process in 2005 that was several months long with the owners, optional participatory process to come up with this. They then did another one in 2011, and what they found is that the owners basically ratified these ends. But every three to 5 years, they pull it up again, do another visioning process with all owners are invited to, and say, do these need to change? Do these need to shift? Or are we going to ratify these again? It's another way that owners participate in directing a cooperative. So I referenced that there are different types of cooperatives. Common Ground is a consumer cooperative. So that means a cooperative is defined, the type of co-op it is, by who is allowed to participate, who can own it. In our case, any consumer. Any consumer who comes in and shops with Common Ground, whether you buy one chocolate bar a year, and they can be one chocolate bar a year, you can purchase a share in Common Ground and be a full owner. Other consumer cooperatives in our community, the U of I Credit Union. Credit unions are cooperatives. And anyone is in the, they define who. Now, it used to be the U of I, you had to work for the U of I. It is now you have to work or live in Champaign-Urbana. So they define their community, in that case, anyone who works or lives in Champaign-Urbana, and then they must let anyone purchase a share of their cooperative or their credit union. Credit unions actually have an amazing and revolutionary history. I'm not going to go into them on my own, but you should really, there's two different historical branches. One would be on the East Coast, which was connected to the communist movement in the United States, and one would be in the rural South, connected to, basically was run by African American community to re-empower themselves, and there's some amazing stories there, and control their own money. But in recent years, credit unions have started to work more and more like banks, and the reason for that actually is legislation. The banking industry was very threatened by credit unions and what they were accomplishing. Why would you go purchase a product, a loan, whatever, from another bank if you could do it with your credit union, who would give you the same rates and then invest any profit back in your community and make loans to people who are high risk, and take care of the community? Why would you go invest your money with a bank? So banks started fighting them really hardcore. And this happened in the 40s and 50s, and started changing regulations that they're so difficult now that credit unions generally cost more to bank with than a traditional bank. And it's because of regulations. And they're actually right now continuing to try and regulate credit unions out of existence. So this is a fight that might interest you right now. Credit unions really need active owners, and some of them don't even realize it. If you go to a U of I credit union meeting, they say they attract about 40 owners. I don't know how many owners they have, but it's vastly more than Common Ground Food Co-op. But people have forgotten how to participate and that they're invited to participate. And when we participate in our credit unions and understand what's going on, we can also understand what's going on with legislation, and we can have more legal power to change the rules and to help defend credit unions. But credit unions are very at risk, have been for decades, but more so than ever right now. Credit unions are such a small percentage of the overall banking business in the US, but banks are still so threatened. Credit unions did wonderful after the economic crisis, because even though they're investing in more people that are supposedly high risk in our community, they're making those loans based on relationships, and they were not making risky loans to people. They were not making risky mortgages. And so they didn't experience, I think there were a few credit unions that closed, very few, through the economic crisis. They did wonderfully. Not only did that, but their ownership base went through the roof after the economic crisis. People, even though this is so hidden from them, knew they wanted out of banks and they wanted into something they controlled. Banks do not like this. They are really coming down on credit unions right now. The regulation has forced them to behave more and more like banks. Because the banks believe that they can make them behave like banks, then they have to be regulated by banks. No special rules for credit unions gone. So I'm going to stop there, but a very interesting fight. So I think it's really worthwhile to participate in our credit union, even though the rates are sometimes higher. Then there's the Art Theater Co-op. This is one that I'm extremely proud of. Anyone here ever been to the Art Theater Co-op? All right, awesome. This is so I'm talking to the converted, okay. The Art Theater Co-op was a unique solution to a problem, and co-ops often are. The Art Theater was run by an individual who had a full-time day job, who then came and worked all night long at the Art Theater for free. He couldn't afford to pay himself. It has very narrow margins, and it's an industry that either needs to reinvent itself or is dying, the theater co-op, or the movie theater experience. And his wife finally got tired of that and said, I'm tired of you working for free. We have kids, we have a life, we can't do this. And so the owner came to a member of our board of directors and said, would it be possible to make this a co-op? Turns out it had never been done before. The Art Theater Co-op, I think we should all be very proud in Champaign-Urbana, is the first cooperatively owned theater in the nation. I think that's something to really celebrate, and it is successful. And they are actually paying a general manager, and they're paying their staff not as high as they'd like, but better and better wages all the time. And so this is anyone who watches a movie at the theater can purchase a share. They put shares on sale in the fall of, I'm going to get the year wrong. I see someone in the audience doing the math too. I think it was 2012, fall of 2012. And they needed to sell enough equity, $200,000 worth of equity, to be able to purchase the new digital equipment. Movies are all now digital, and they have to purchase this extremely expensive equipment to basically take it over and get this equipment and get started. And they thought it would take them until the late spring of the next year, and they got it done in 2-3 months. because people were so enthusiastic. Again, people don't even know, it's hard to get the word out about cooperatives. Even with the word not getting out so loudly, people are passionate about getting involved in this, and it's been a huge success story, and they're actually going to national conferences of independent theaters and telling them their success story, and there's a lot of people who are aging out of wanting to take care of these independent theaters who basically think they have to close it, who are saying, maybe we can make it a cooperative. So by their very existence, they're possibly changing other communities throughout the country because this becomes an option for them. All right, I spent a lot of time on consumer co-ops because that's where my passion lies. But let's talk about housing co-ops. There are housing cooperatives. That means everyone who lives in the housing has a controlling share and owns it. Does anyone here know about Couch here in Champaign-Urbana? Okay, so we have a few people. Couch is, it's a cooperative housing. I don't fully understand their structure. Not everyone who lives in it owns it. They collectively make decisions about the housing, about people moving into the housing, how the bills will be paid, if they're going to do shared meals. But Couch itself actually owns the houses. It's an unusual structure. There's also housing cooperatives in New York. New York is, in some ways, a mixed bag success story. Housing cooperatives were started in New York to keep prices down, to keep New York accessible as it started to grow. That the building would actually be owned by the people who owned the individual apartments in the building, that they would collectively pay for the care of the building and collectively decide who comes into the building. The problem is that in New York, that means a limited number of people who all live in the same building who might have a lot in common get to decide who moves in. Interesting aspect of cooperatives that may or may not be a problem. Producer co-ops, Ocean Spray, you may have heard of them. They are a producer co-op. Organic Valley. Organic Valley actually is one of my favorites. Now, this is Ocean Spray shows that not everyone has the exact same values. This was a bunch of farmers that got together and said, we need to cut out the middleman. We're fruit growers, and the prices they're paying us are going down and down and down. The middleman's getting all the money. We're going to lose our family farms. What if we became a cooperative and started actually producing, basically taking our berries from field to production to bottles ourselves, so there'd be no middleman, so we get better prices and keep our farms open. They did that quite successfully. Their values aren't necessarily environmental. Organic Valley is a different story. This was in the 1990s that dairy farmers were starting to see huge squeeges on prices, and little independent dairy farms were going out of business left and right, especially in the heartland, up in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And they got together and said the same thing they wanted to do what Ocean Spray did, but they wanted to be organic. And so they actually trained all their farmers to grow completely organically and created their own production facilities. They are wildly successful. Their home base is up near Viroqua, Wisconsin, and they've actually continued to support all sorts of initiatives for more cooperatives, a food co-op up there, as well as food hubs. They've actually reinvested in bettering the entire food system. And then this is an unusual one, but there's a group of yoga instructors in Champaign-Urbana that are interested in forming a yoga cooperative. They would rent a space together, they would create pamphlets and classes together, but they would be independent owners of it, but they're selling a product, they're selling the class. So it's technically a producer co-op. They are producing something of value and collectively selling it together and owning the infrastructure. So we'll see if that happens. I hope it does. Worker cooperatives. Rainbow, I'm going to put a couple of these up here. I put up ones that we tend to work with, because I also give this presentation to my staff. Rainbow Cooperative Grocery is actually the only cooperative grocery that I'm aware of in the US that's actually owned by the workers, not the consumers. So you and I could not walk in and buy a share of our local cooperative. It's owned by the staff. And the Equal Exchange, that's an organic fair trade coffee company, same with Just Coffee, organic fair trade coffee company. And both those companies, though, what you have to understand about a worker cooperative is that's a much deeper level of investment. You actually own the business, and the profits belong to you, and you get to decide who comes on staff. You get a vote in that. You get a vote in your business structure and everything. So when someone comes on board in one of these companies, and I'm not going to name which one it is, in case I have a number just slightly wrong, but once the staff, you can work as a non-owner. They do have non-owner workers. The staff then votes on who is going to be offered the opportunity to become owners. Once you decide to become an owner, in some of these companies, it can be upward from $5,000 to $10,000 investment to buy your share of the company, because you actually own it. You're going to control it, and when there's profits, they're going to be yours. And maybe there's only 100 employees. So you are actually buying a share of a company, and there's going to be very limited numbers of owners, so the share has to be higher because this is actually the base capital that runs the business. These workers generally get to pay it in over a number of years, 2 to 5 years coming out of their paycheck. Once they're fully vested, then they are a voting owner. Evergreen cooperatives, I'm talking too long as it is, so I'm going to try and keep that short, but this is an amazing project coming out of Cleveland. If you're interested in cooperatives, this is something where the city decided to go into a blighted neighborhood where all the businesses have been leaving, huge green tracts of land where businesses buildings had rotted down, and said, we need to bring jobs into this community that will not leave. Because the jobs keep leaving. What jobs will never leave Cleveland? And what they found was, what are our anchors? Our anchors are our universities and our hospitals. They developed businesses that would serve those. They decided to develop co-ops that would serve those businesses, built those cooperatives, trained workers within that community with an extremely high unemployment rate, and now those workers are buying the cooperative from the organization that started the business on their behalf, and they will soon own it. It's very exciting. Lots of people trying to mimic what they're doing. Purchasing and marketing cooperatives. This is when small businesses, independent businesses work together to create a brand so they are recognized, so they can compete with the big boys, and also so they compete on price. Common Ground is part of a cooperative buying club, actually, National Cooperative Grocer Association. Through them, we are the second largest purchaser of natural foods in the nation, only to Whole Foods. We are part of a collective of cooperatives that have that buying power. Now, I'll tell you, this is Whole Foods and this is us, but we're still second. And that gives us some weight, that gives us some negotiation power. We get much better prices than a lot of independent natural food stores you go into that are really struggling these days because we're buying collectively as one base. And it allows us little independent cooperatives to compete with the big boys and not get shut out by them. And that's what's happening at Do It Best. That's also what Ace Hardware is, Best Western. There's another one I wanted to mention. Well, that one's going to come into my head, but there's a lot of these. Oh, and 2 others in town. Champagne Surplus is part of one. They don't do the collective branding, just collective buying. But Champagne Surplus is part of a purchasing cooperative. Yes?
So Whole Foods, I believe, is not a cooperative, but
no.
they're able to associate with the National Grocers?
No, not at all. They are an independently owned corporation run by Bob Mackey. What we're saying is, the National Cooperative Grocer Association together is the second largest purchaser to Whole Foods. So there's Whole Foods purchasing, and then there's us nationally of natural foods. So, and then there's the large. Unfortunately, there is a kind of a Walmart of natural foods nationally. There used to be lots of independent regional distributors of natural food brands, and they were all bought out by something called United Natural Foods in the 1990s and into the 2000s, and they now control over 90% of natural food distribution. So if you're talking about major brands, which I think of some, but even like Organic Valley, they're distributed through United Natural Foods. So with those distributors, we are the second largest purchaser other than Whole Foods, so they have to negotiate with us fairly. The smaller independent stores get the worst prices. The smaller you are, the worse your prices. They get far worse prices than us because United Natural Foods doesn't have to negotiate with them. They have what that independent store needs. That independent store has to buy it at the price it's set at. We get to negotiate because we have this collective buying power. Another one in town is actually Rogards. Rogards Office Supply is part of a national purchasing cooperative, a very powerful one, actually. And that's part of how they stay competitive and stay open. So in 2012, the UN declared it the International Year of Cooperatives. One thing to keep in mind is that in the US, only 1 in 10 people is an owner of a cooperative. But we have some of the lowest rates of cooperative ownership in the world. There are places throughout the world where it is much, much higher. And actually those Rochdale Pioneers I talked to you about, their co-op that they founded is actually today, you might or might not have heard of them because they've been in the news a lot lately for not good reasons, it became The Cooperative. That's its name in Britain. It's called The Cooperative. It is a chain of hundreds of grocery stores that are actually collectively owned by the residents of that country. Almost everyone is a member. They unfortunately decided to diversify by going into banks, owning farms, wind energy, all sorts of things that seemed like wonderful positive directions to go, but became too much too fast. And they're kind of in a crisis right now, deciding which of those industries to let go of. They started in food, though, and they actually were started from that Rochdale Pioneers. They grew up and became The Cooperative. If you you in Britain, you know what the cooperative is. The government actually came to the cooperative during the economic crisis when banks were failing and asked them to purchase several banks and run them, to keep them collectively owned by the residents of England and Britain to stabilize the country. They did that. Unfortunately, they weren't ready to take on that volume that fast, and it has actually hurt them. But to the extent that the government actually negotiates with them through banking crises to help, it is a major force in their country. In Japan, actually, we have the highest membership, highest cooperative membership / ownership, you can call it member or owner, in the world. 1 in 3 people are a member of a cooperative. They have all sorts of kinds of cooperatives, up to and including funerary services cooperatives. All sorts of interesting and innovative things happening in cooperatives there. So we're actually really far behind. In the rest of the world, this is seen as an economic solution to keeping wealth in communities, keeping wealth with the workers, and it's done through, it's being used in many ways. Yes?
Where would the home care cooperatives?
I will mention that healthcare cooperatives have started to exist with the Obamacare, and I do not know a lot yet about how those are structured, but I hear they're actually way more successfully than expected. And I've even been talked to by a few people in government and municipalities who are interested in trying to start one in our area for government and municipal workers. So I don't know a lot about that. But real quickly, there are over, just in my industry, which is the food cooperative industry, there are over 200 food co-ops in the United States. We do over $1.5 billion in sales collectively, and we have over 1.5 million cooperative owners just in food co-ops alone here in the United States. Common Ground has over 5,000 of those owners, and this year we'll do about 8.5 million worth of those sales. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Common Ground, just background if you don't know us. Common Ground was founded in 1974 as a buying club. It was actually founded by students on campus. At the time, we were in the Illinois Disciples Foundation building. Some people here will definitely remember that. Some of you will not. But it was a church with a very strong social justice and action mission. And at the time, the neighborhood they're in now, or that building was in, was actually a very economically depressed neighborhood. It was not the middle of campus. It is now pretty much campus. And so in the 1970s, they went to the community and said, what could we most provide? What do you need? How could we help? And they said, access to fresh local food. This is not a new problem. There were no grocery stores with any reasonable walking distance of that area. That little convenience store on the corner of Green and 6th was the only place to get food in that neighborhood. That changed in 2008 when that county market opened, but from the 70s to 2008, that corner grocery store was it, except for Common Ground. So Common Ground started by asking people in the community to become owners around the church. They each paid in $1 for their ownership share. They took that $75, rented a truck, drove up north and hit several farms, and went to an organic distribution place in Wisconsin and drove back, and then went distributed out of the back of a truck. That's how it started. And actually, Common Ground and Strawberry Fields, if you know Strawberry Fields, independent natural food store in town, started as one organization. And they actually split in 1975 over differences in vision, and became two different strong local businesses. So Common Ground in 1978 opened a regular store space in the basement of that church. And it was open just a couple days a week, pretty erratic hours. And we stayed in that basement until 2008. Now, to get into this building, if you hadn't been there, and I see many faces here that had been there, but if you hadn't, you parked in the parking lot behind the building, you went down some stairs, you went in a door that was a door to basically an office building, not a grocery store. There was a little wood sign next to the door, you had to know what it was. You went down some more stairs, you went around a corner into the basement, and then there was this door with a little sign and a little tiny window, and you had to know there was a grocery store behind it. And then you had to go in there knowing you were having an extremely different and unusual experience already, and have the courage to walk in and figure out, okay, start shopping. I actually did start shopping there when I first moved to town in the 1990s, and I didn't know what was going on quite, but it was the only place I knew to get natural foods so far, and I had someone say to me, "Are you an owner?" No. And I didn't know what that meant, and she was really aggressive, and I left and it never came back. It was kind of an intimidating shopping experience. If you were part of the community, though, it was an unbelievably rich community to be a part of. And it grew in that little tiny basement of the church in members and sales. Every year I can find records of its existence, even though it was that hard to get to. Again, cooperatives light people on fire. People go out of their way to participate in them, and they did in Common Ground. Into the fall of 2008, we relocated. There was a visioning process in the summer of 2005, and the owners said, ultimately, they wanted to get out of the basement and have a storefront grocery store where they could impact the community more deeply, sell more local foods, and make sure people knew about cooperation. They were going to have to get out of the basement to do that. In 2006, they started trying to hire their first general manager. It had always been a collective management structure. They hired me in September of 2006 as their first general manager with the goal, my job, was to get them out of the basement. That was what I was told when I was hired. In the fall of 2008, we did it. We moved to our current location at Lincoln Square Mall, and that's just a bunch of details, but 50% of that expansion, which cost $750,000, was funded by our owners or the existing money in the business. From what financial records I can find, Common Ground Food Co-op had lost money every year of its existence until 2007. So the owners raised over $250,000 of their own money, knowing we'd pretty much never been profitable. And together, we somehow scraped it together and built this store that ended up being wildly successful at Lincoln Square Mall. That was the first time we opened to the general public when we were in the basement. We could not sell to the public because that space could not pass health code. So they only allowed us to exist because we were only selling to members. They saw us as a buying club. Someone had to have a share in Common Ground to shop with us, because then we were outside of the rules of the health code. So we opened to the general public, and we thought what would happen is that now that people didn't have to be owners to shop, they'd stop becoming owners. That vast amounts of our sales would be to people who weren't owners or just shopping with us because it was a place to get natural foods. That's not what happened. We thought it would be at least 50% of our shoppers would not own Common Ground. They wouldn't bother. Why invest? You can shop here anyway, same price. You get some extra benefits, but that's it. They kept investing in droves. We went from 1,700 owners to 5,300 owners in 5 years, and over 80% of our sales is still to people who choose to invest in Common Ground, just because they want to be a part of it. They don't have to. So we completed a second expansion in 2012 because we grew so fast at Lincoln Square that there was no room to put any of the food. So we did a second expansion. This expansion was $2.5 million. Common Ground's owners came up with $1 million of that in loans to their cooperative. And loans are in a powerful way that we actually can keep our money local that people don't talk about through cooperatives. Cooperatives are uniquely structured that our owners can make loans to us. You can't loan to any random small business that wants to start unless you are a verified investor, which means you make over $250,000 a year. They're not allowed to accept loans from you. And so we actually can't fund what we want to see happen in our own community. Things like Kickstarter is a way to try and get around that. But cooperatives, we can actually accept loans from our owners, and we can offer interest. So the interest, instead of going back to a bank God knows where, is going back to people in this community who are trying to build their retirement fund. That money is being spent by local people and going back to local people and creating growth that they believe in. So we won all these awards, and we have been for the last 5 years, actually the fastest growing food co-op in the nation. So just some quick results. In 2006, we were purchasing $100,000 worth of food from local farmers and producers. We define local as within 100 miles of Common Ground. It is now $1.4 million projected for this year. So we have more than 10 times increased the amount of money going back to local farms and producers within 100 miles of our doors, vastly increasing the stability of our food shed. We created jobs. When I started with Common Ground, we had 7 employees. We now actually have over 100. I need to update this slide. We have 100 now. We went from having no benefits other than a staff discount to adding health insurance, adding an 3% IRA match available to part-time and full-time staff. We now have vision and dental available to full-time and part-time staff. We have the discount. I'm missing a few, but we have a very rich benefits package. We've also increased our base wage several times. And right now, we're always planning for the future on when we can do that again. I've actually been actively speaking with our representatives in support in our state of increasing the minimum wage, because that's something Common Ground believes in. Creating ownership. When When I started Common Ground, I had 1,100 owners. We now have over 5,300 owners. And what that means is the cooperative is more deeply rooted in our community. More people are participating. It's more fiscally stable. More people know what a cooperative is. And that community wealth is jointly owned by more members of the community and controlled by more members of the community. And then creating access. Common Ground, I'm very proud to serve Common Ground. I get to interact nationally with the food cooperative movement several times a year. And while they all have amazing communities behind them with great visions, Common Ground's community is uniquely very concerned about addressing economic access to local and natural foods. So we've created a program called the Food for All program. I'm not going to read that all off. You can get the pamphlets in store, but it's an economic access program that is now being copied by half a dozen co-ops throughout the country, and it's growing daily. We'll be presenting at a national conference this year about the success of our program. We also, though, I encourage you to participate. I see many Common Ground owners here. On April 26th, it is a Saturday, we are hosting a roundtable discussion about the Food for All program with owners to vision its next 5 years. We want it to continue to grow, to continue to innovate, to continue to create more economic access to local and natural foods, but we need owners' voices there to figure out how to do that in the best possible way. And it's a free event. We just need you to register so we know you're coming. If you want to know more, ask me afterwards. And that's it. That's the whole spiel. Let's put that back up.
Jacqueline, I want to ask you about the financing for the expansion and so on. You said, I think, that about 50% of that came from owners in there. I want to ask you about the rest, and particularly in regard to your discussion of banks fighting credit unions. Because in my conversations with people at the National Cooperative Bank in Hillsborough, Ohio, their loans are going pretty much to New York and Ohio. And the explanation that I got from them was that that's because legislation, state legislation in those two states makes it much easier for them to work. Can you explain me two things? One, where you got the rest of the money for the expansion and so on. And secondly, what is it about the legislation precisely in Illinois that makes it so tough to form these cooperatives?
Okay, question number one. We are very proud to have worked with the North Country Cooperative Development Fund out of Minneapolis. They are a fund that exists only to fund cooperatives. That's what they do. Because of the way they have to be legally structured, unfortunately, they have to lend money at rates that are pretty set and at the moment are higher than traditional banks. But at the time, in 2008, they took a risk on us nobody else would, and that's what they do. They look for cooperatives they believe could be successes that no one else will invest in, and they invest in them. North Country Cooperative Development Fund out of Minneapolis. They're an amazing organization. When we went to expand in 2012, even though we'd been Business of the Year, fastest growing food co-op, you name it, nobody locally would invest in us again. We went to, because it's going to be locally owned banks or it's going to be cooperatives, and nobody would do it. And they wouldn't take the risk on us because they didn't understand the cooperative structure. To them, we're a church in that they don't have one person to sign on the dotted line. They just see our owners as people who show up to church every Sunday. They could leave at any time. That's how they see it. Not true, actually, not how it works at all. But it's very hard to educate bankers on cooperatives. It's work I'm still doing. And part of why we actually would like to work with a locally owned bank is because we'd like to educate them about cooperatives, because access to capital is one of the biggest problems cooperatives face. So we've worked with North Country Cooperative Development. The local credit union has not been able to lend to us. There are very, very stringent rules around business lending for credit unions. And our credit union has decided they are so difficult that they just won't even go, they won't even do business lending at this point. They hope to do it in the next decade. But it's going to take an immense amount of work for them, and only I think it's 10 or 12% of their portfolio can be business lending. And there's all sorts of stringent rules. So we've talked to them for years. We had great conversations with EJ, who's the CEO over there. He really wanted to help us. Their board wanted to help us. They did not feel they could deal with the legislations at this point in time, the restrictions. So some co-ops do work directly with credit unions, but it's very hard because they are in every way deterred from doing business lending. The Cooperative Act of Illinois was founded in 1908. There's part of the problem right there. It has not been updated ever since 1908, and it is very strictly really created as a subset of the ag co-op law. And it really your business has to be agriculture related to be a cooperative. So right now, in a way, there's no way to create a worker cooperative, not legally. You can function like one, but you're not going to file as a cooperative. You're not going to have the tax protections of a cooperative. And actually, technically, your owners don't own it. You're just behaving as if they do. Technically, legally, your board owns it because there's no statute that a worker cooperative could use. Right now, part of the problem is also equity. The equity limit in Illinois is $500. We can only ask our owners tops for $500. That's fine for a consumer cooperative. When you have 5,000 owners, it's okay if everyone's just investing $60 or $100 or whatever. But a worker cooperative needs thousands. And so that has kept them also, even if they can find a way to be ag-related, and it can be pretty tangential, they can't get enough equity from their owners to be a worker cooperative. Right now there is a law trying to go through the House and Senate in Illinois, trying to up that equity limit. And basically, for the first time, get the word cooperative in front of our legislators by doing something easy, by just taking that cap up. Because $500 in 1908 is over $9,000 today. So we're just trying to take that cap to $10,000 as a first step. That would open the door to worker co-ops, and then a fuller overhaul of the law is needed. And there's a group legally working on that. Common Ground is actually funding some of the legal work behind developing a new statute. Yes?
Hi, I was just wondering, you're right next to the market at the square, and then just how that has interacted between you and them, because I think it works.
We think it works phenomenally. It's an unexpected thing, but food cooperatives actually, if they don't have a farmer's market near them, will intentionally build one because they're such an excellent thing. It's such an excellent win-win. What you find is a lot of people know about farmers markets who aren't yet ready to enter into natural food stores. And so basically they find out about us by coming in to get everything they couldn't get at the farmers market. And our customers go out there and buy everything they can from the farmers that they would usually get from us. So it's been very win-win. We've helped each other grow and stabilize, and we work very actively with the city on ways that we can help and help grow it. We promote it and so forth. But we also have found that a lot of farmers, though, are making the choice that it's a lot of work. It's a ton of work to run a booth at a farmer's market. And some of them would rather get a wholesale price instead of a retail price, but not have to show up every Saturday morning and start work at 4 a.m. after running the farm all week. So some of them are actually selling things through us now instead of the market. Some of their products are only available through us. And others won't work with us at all because they'd rather get the full retail price, and we totally respect that. Any other questions?
How would you classify the 2,000 or so member co-op, healthcare co-op in New York, home care, and as well talk about perhaps a food co-op opening up nearer to Chicago, a smaller one?
Again, I will admit my ignorance around healthcare co-ops. We're outside my expertise there. So that's a consumer co-op. Basically, by purchasing insurance, you're allowed to become an owner, but they have to decide what that owner group is. So with us, it's absolutely anyone who walks in, but some consumer cooperatives, like a credit union, it may be only people who work for this organization. But they're consuming the product of the loan or the investment, and therefore, as a consumer, they have a right to be an owner. So if you're buying healthcare from a healthcare co-op, it's a consumer co-op. But I can't really speak to that at all. I have a lot more to learn there. It's a new and emerging thing. There are actually 10 food co-ops trying to start in Illinois right now alone. This is, co-ops go through growth and boom cycles, and we go through growth cycles when we call it a me time. It's a me time right now. Everybody's feeling a lot of economic crunch. Everyone's thinking about how we can become more stable as communities rather than just about ourselves, and co-ops go through the roof then. And so right now there are more food co-ops trying to start than are currently open. And that's true in other cooperative fields as well. If you go to the Food Co-op Initiative's website, they have a map of every single startup in the US, and it's just covered in dots. So there are definite empty spots in certain states. But so in Illinois, there's 10. trying to start. There's one trying to start in Bloomington Normal, very successful startup called Green Top. They, I think, will be open within the next 2 years. Opening a cooperative usually takes 3 to 7 years, and it takes a lot of time and energy and money. And then there's one trying to open in either Peoria, Springfield, and then a whole mess of them up by Chicago. Any other questions I can answer?
I'm wondering if you know about, you made the decision, or the co-op made the decision to go from worker members a while back, if I recall.
Well, it was long before me, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I wonder if you'd say anything about, if you know just generally about how many co-ops actually have that model where a member isn't just a share, kind of a share cooperative, as opposed to people that, and I wonder if it's just a matter of training or something that.
So basically, he's talking about a model where it's still a consumer co-op. The reason you have a right to participate is because you shop there, but you also then have you either can or have to work at the cooperative to stay an active owner. Sometimes you can shop and not be a worker, but you pay a higher price. Sometimes you have to work to participate. It's a model that disappeared during the 80s because many states' cooperative statutes do not have legal protection for it, and there are 3 different legal ways that a co-op can get in a lot of trouble allowing workers to work there. 1, unfair competition practices. Your competition can actually say, well, they can get free labor, we can't, that's not fair, and the FCC can get involved. They can get involved. The one that's most likely is that it's considered, if you're paying a regular discount, people say, oh, I'm volunteering. You're not volunteering if you're getting a consistent discount. You're getting paid, but you're not getting paid in a way that's legal according to the government. We have to pay minimum wage and we have to pay taxes. But if we're giving you that discount, you're not paying taxes on it, and we're not paying minimum wage. And there is one co-op down in Mississippi that got shut down because of it. They could not pay the back fees, because not only do we have to go back and pay fines and pay taxes, we have to actually back pay those workers for their hours, and you don't have the right to say no. I could say, I owe you now for 100 hours of work you did last year, and you say, oh, that's okay, I don't need it. Not an option. The government will force us to pay you. Because what they're afraid of is that we're unfairly taking advantage of workers. Because that is actually pay. To get any kind of consistent remuneration is considered pay and is under laws. And then the third is insurance. You're not a customer because you're volunteering, but you're also not paid staff, and you will fall through the cracks. That happened at Willie Street Co-op up in Madison, Wisconsin, and they had to pay out over $1 million when they were sued when a worker was injured on site and the insurance wouldn't cover it. So our laws are not set up to make that happen. Now in New York, there is a co-op that a lot of people have heard of called Park Slope. Park Slope Food Co-op is very famous. They're large, and everyone must work to be an owner there, but you only have to work 3 hours a month, and the prices are phenomenal because other than 1 or 2 paid staff, it is all volunteer. They are under a statute that actually no longer even exists, and new food co-ops can't even incorporate under it in New York. And it doesn't exist in Illinois, never did. So it's legally an uphill slog. There are very few left, and a lot of the ones that exist are not even in a legal loophole. They're in we think we fit the laws and no one's looking because we're small. And I'm not going to name names, but there are co-ops under that. And actually Common Ground was in that state many, many, many years ago when it was necessary to work.
Hey, I was just thinking about the competing priorities for growth, and you flagged the case in Britain of the cooperative expanding and diversifying and some of the problems that were brought out there. So I was wondering if you could kind of translate that to our context of Urbana-Champaign and kind of how you're positioning these priorities for the growth of Common Ground and the cooperative movement more generally here.
I personally believe, and this is me personally, I'm not speaking for the board of directors, I believe that what we're seeing is that co-ops thrive when they stick to what they know. I would rather see us inspire more co-ops to start. Like a member of our board served the Art Theater Co-op, was an organizer, became a board member, and helped that seed its own thing. Then see us go into trying to run a movie theater when what we know how to do is run a grocery store. This is where we see cooperatives get in trouble. First off is when the diversification is way too far out from what they do. Food co-ops have also tried to own farms. So far that has been pretty darn unsuccessful. Most of those farms have been sold off or operating at a loss that is drawing upon the rest of the co-op's resources, and they've just chosen to keep it open. I don't know, I think there is 1 or 2 examples of break even after a number of years. So when we go outside of what we know how to do, we're taking a big risk, and it has to be really well thought out. In our case, Common Ground is growing very fast. There's no denial of that. The thing is that most co-ops in college towns are excellent communities for food co-ops. They thrive there. It's where we actually thrive the best. But in the 1980s and 90s, when food co-ops were coming out of the basement and growing to fit the demand of the community, Common Ground didn't, for whatever reasons. It was when we really weren't in touch with other food co-ops, we didn't know what was going on. They kind of found out about us, and we found out about them around 2004, 2005, and started actually communicating about what had been happening in the food co-op world. This community is vastly underserved for natural foods. The amount of natural foods available is extremely low for a community of this size and this education level. And so there's a lot of room for growth. And my belief is that we're like, well, we're going to expand and see what happens. Well, what happened is the demand was so much higher than we expected. We were having a hard time keeping up, and the farms grew exponentially. I think we have a lot of catching up to do to creating a stable local food network. And what food co-ops do is we become that place everyone comes for knowledge, opportunities. What we found is a lot of organizations in town that work on local food said to us, our mission has taken off since you've gotten here because people come in and get plugged into the movement. We're working out of someone's basement, we're working out of some little office, some downtown, whatever, and people don't know where to find us, they don't know we exist. Now there's one place they come in and they know about all the things you can get plugged into. They mention us in their newsletter, we work together for donations. There's a central hub. And to be honest, we're still really small. For a community of our size, Champaign's been asking for a store since 2008. Some people will remember that the decision between Champaign and Urbana was almost divisive in 2008, in which town we were located in. We had ideal locations in both towns. One turned out having environmental problems, and so we ended up in Urbana. That was really the reason. And we don't regret it, but the owners have been very clear that when we expanded in 2012, we actually had some owners mad at us, because they said, why are we not getting a Champaign store instead of a bigger Urbana store? And we were able to explain, actually, to weather competition, which is coming. The natural foods movement is changing, and a lot of the big players are starting to come into smaller communities like ours, or they're planning to, they're trying to. We know that food co-ops weather that just fine if they're full service. If they have, if they have the hot sandwich bar, if they have, basically I could do my whole grocery shopping there if I wanted to. When we're a little kind of specialty store, those are the ones that get closed when the national chains come. So we said we have to make one big store. And everyone agreed to that. And actually, we're a mid-sized store for a food co-op, but a much bigger store. So the reason I currently believe in growth is that we've been fiscally conservative every step of the way, and the demand continues and continues to increase. It's not like we're saying, well, let's build a store and see if they come. We are now sales-wise at the volume we thought we would be 5 years after the expansion, and we're a year and a half in. So, and that keeps happening to us. If you ask our staff, they are frustrated by the size of the backstock and not being able to order enough milk to keep on the shelf, again. So the demand is there, and my belief is, why shouldn't it be controlled by the community? Why shouldn't you guys get to control all of that food dollars and make sure it's going to local farms and creating jobs that are paying better and better? So, but it's always hard to tell people because we have grown immensely fast. And so they're like, oh, Jacqueline's all about excessive growth. I'm like, no, I'm actually about getting us to scale for a community our size so we can really change the food shed in this community, and we're well on our way. But it isn't endless growth. That is, if people are asking, that's not my vision. It's getting to scale and then seeing what else we can do to infill a lot more issues and help more. So I don't know if that answers all of it, but. Were there any other questions?
Please join me in thanking Jacqueline for coming here today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That was a lot of fun.